Today's text comes from Jeremiah chapter 31, verses 7 through 14. Hear the word of the Lord. For thus says Yahweh, sing aloud with gladness for Jacob and raise shouts for the chief of the nations. Proclaim, give praise, and say, save, O Yahweh, your people, the remnant of Israel. See, I'm going to bring them from the land of the north and gather them from the farthest parts of the earth. Among them, the blind and the lame, those with child and those in labor together. A great company. They shall return here. With weeping they shall come, and with consolations I will lead them back. I will let them walk by brooks of water in a straight path in which they shall not stumble. For I have become a father to Israel, and Ephraim is my firstborn. Hear the word of Yahweh, O nations, and declare it in the coastlands far away. Say, he who scattered Israel will gather him and will keep him as a shepherd a flock. For Yahweh has ransomed Jacob and has redeemed him from hands too strong for him. They shall come and sing aloud on the height of Zion, and they shall be radiant over the goodness of Yahweh, over the grain, the wine, and the oil, over the young of the flock and the herd. Their life shall become like a watered garden, and they shall never languish again. Then shall the young women rejoice in the dance, and the young men and the old shall be merry. I will turn their mourning into joy. I will comfort them and give them gladness for sorrow. I will give the priests their fill of fatness, and my people shall be satisfied with my bounty, says Yahweh. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Have you ever left everything behind to start over? My family has had the experience of leaving a country we loved on short notice. We had resources at our disposal, however. We had a couple of weeks to sell belongings, pack a shipping crate, organize a place to stay, get our kids and animals safely onto a plane with our luggage. It was a hard 2 weeks, but we knew where we were going. We still had several months' worth of income to plan with. We had a place to stay lined up and waiting. We didn't become refugees in the normal sense of the word, even if we felt like we had been exiled. I'm living now in my 41st address. I've moved a lot. I've always had some sense of where I was going and how I would navigate my new surroundings. Can you imagine starting over with nothing? I can't. I question the lectionary readings at times. We would expect today's readings to be about Christmas, as this is the second Sunday in the 12-day Christmas season. Today's passage from Jeremiah does not deal directly with Christmas. It's not a messianic text. It's about the return of exiles from Babylonian captivity. The text sets a counterpoint to Jeremiah's message, generally characterized as doom and gloom. Well, the passage has words in it, at least, about rejoicing and praising Yahweh. It still would have felt like doom and gloom to Jeremiah's audience. See, in order for these words to become good news for anyone, the people first had to be hauled away from all that they knew, taken out of their land, kicked to the curb of humanity, and find themselves in utter despair. It was only after more than one generation of living in exile, that the good news described in today's passage would come into effect. To compound things, those who return to the land, as Jeremiah describes them, would be refugees. They would be the dregs of society. They would be the blind and the lame. They would travel the road while pregnant or nursing little ones. They would return amid weeping. It's hardly the idyllic picture of redemption that we would like to imagine. To top it all off, the exile only applied to the upper echelons of society anyway. The poor would have been left behind from the start of Jeremiah's message. Almost 3 decades ago, Karen and I were privileged to work with refugees escaping a revolution in southern Mexico state of Chiapas. As refugee camps go, these were not bad. People were not fenced in. They were not imprisoned or forced to dig their own latrines. They had freedom of movement. We helped provide food and access to medical care. Karen and I got to spend time giving child care, telling Bible stories to adults, assisting them in finding new sources of income and accessing needed supplies. We had the chance to help with hygiene instruction and some other basic forms of assistance. While we were there, a group of men returned home to see what they might salvage. Neighbors had taken their animals and other belongings. They could have them back now, but the neighbors wanted to charge them as though they were selling them something of their own, charging them for keep of their animals. Their houses had been looted by their own neighbors. They returned dejected. One young couple had a newborn who had come down with chicken pox, as no one in the community had been exposed to or vaccinated to face unknown diseases to them, to face a larger world that they did not know and did not understand. They were unprepared. Refugees leave a culture, a language, a known environment, a way of life to embark on a new journey with only the most meager of resources and the will to survive, the will to make a new life for the next generation. For the Jews, going off into exile was one thing. It was the basis for Jeremiah's nickname, Old Doom and Gloom. Preaching a message of exile had gotten him on the king's naughty list. It had made him persona non grata. Now in chapter 31, he talks good news for generations down the road. The people would return as refugees, per his description. Oh, he terms this good news. He says this is a reason to rejoice. They're to sing with gladness, raise shouts of praise to Yahweh, and rejoice in this great reversal. It just doesn't seem to make much sense. Does it sound like hope to you? To complicate matters, he describes the descendants returning as blind, lame, and otherwise traveling under the most vulnerable and difficult of circumstances. How is it good news that one's descendants will be able to rejoice in a return to a land as refugees, ripped out of exile after generations? Amnesty International counts 26 million refugees in the world today. These are the ones officially recognized as such by the UN. They mostly live in refugee camps. 85% of them in the developing world, 50% of them children. They're not exactly welcomed into those countries. They generally are accepted under attitudes more akin to duress. Applying for asylum as a refugee is something most countries make very difficult. Give me your tired, poor, huddled masses struggling to breathe free are not the words they're generally offered. And yet, somehow Jeremiah understands the return of exiles, even in refugee status, as a reason for rejoicing. It would seem like Jeremiah was telling the people that their life in exile would be so bad that an eventual return as blind, lame, pregnant, and nursing refugees was to be much preferred. Then again, as we look closer at the text, he may be including not only the return of exiles from Judah, but also some from Israel who had already been scattered by the Assyrians. More than that, this message is that while exile might have applied only to the upper crust of society when Yahweh's redemption came to pass, it would extend far beyond those elites. It would embrace every member of the exiled company, right down to the most vulnerable. In fact, this whole text is drenched in language of reversal. Ephraim, Joseph's second son, who received the position of firstborn in the inheritance, is claimed as Yahweh's firstborn. The powerful have been overthrown, but now Yahweh will bless one and all without discrimination. For those for whom travel would have been far too great a burden are included in this redemption and under Yahweh's personal care. As they weep along the road, Yahweh would offer consolation, security, lead them tenderly, carefully meeting the needs of the most fragile among them. None would be left behind when it came to Yahweh's redemption. So maybe this is a measure of good news. While Judah had failed to live up to Yahweh's demands of economic justice for all, Yahweh's redemption would restore things to rights. The righteous action of Yahweh would mean that all would have a reason to rejoice and fully participate in the blessings of life under Yahweh's care. Now, this is still technically not a messianic passage. It doesn't reference the coming of Messiah. It does, however, herald so many of those themes of reversal wrapped around the messianic hope. The goodness of Yahweh would be on grand display before all, granting everyone full participation in the bounty of Yahweh's provision. You see, there was a need for starting over in Judah. There was way too much inequality. Too many were cut off from life under Yahweh's bounty. With the return of these ransomed, all would be set aright. God would come among us in a renewed way. Is that not Christmas? Is that not the message that it is okay to start over because God is come into our midst? to set everything aright. For when the ransom are returned, even as refugees, it is by the grace of God.